Good morning. Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week and almost the weekend. It is so close. It is almost here. We've got a great show for you today. At least I believe it's a great show. We've got a lot to discuss, like I always have the habit of saying. Today we're going to talk about a couple different things. And if you thought the New York Knicks, Argentina, Ronald Reagan, and socialism ever had anything to do with each other, well, today on our episode, you will be proven right. We've got all of that to discuss and much, much more. Let's dive into it. And of course, welcome back to We the Future. Just in case you thought we were done discussing or diving into the government shutdown, you would be mistaken. Today is obviously the 7th of November, so we are officially now 38 days into the government shutdown, which is quite a long time. But we have some good news. We finally have the Democrat leaders, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, are finally willing to sit down and discuss a way to make this shutdown come to an end. After the elections that took place on Tuesday this week, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries sent a letter to Trump calling for a bipartisan meeting so that we can all end the government shutdown. Now, this is not, nor should it be, something that is surprising, at least to me, and hopefully not to you. I even warned you about this a couple weeks ago when we first started talking about the government shutdown, that this would be used as a stronghold or a stalemate before they're even willing to discuss. They first had to get to the elections. They first had to make sure that the ideas that were portrayed through the media and by the Democratic officials, that the shutdown was all the Republicans' fault. It was Trump's fault because of their failed policies. And after the elections went the way that the Democrats wanted them to go, which, sad day, they did, that was finally when the Democrats were going to be willing to be open to a discussion of helping the shutdown come to an end. So, I mean, you can't color me surprised. You can't tell me that I at least didn't see this coming, because I did. The writing was on the wall from the very beginning, especially when, we all saw it. At least I warned you about it. They voted so many times, and every single time they voted, the Democrats would vote in favor of not opening the government, and then would get out of session, run to the nearest video camera or microphone, and yell about how the Republicans aren't willing to open up the government and how it's their fault that this is all going down. We talked about it before. We're not going to spend all of today's episode discussing this. In fact, this probably will be my last sentence on it. It's all just very hypocritical. So now that the Tuesday elections went for the way of the Democrats in the elections that were taking place, they are now officially ready to come to an agreement to put their differences aside, at least they say, and finally come to a close with the government shutdown. So we'll see. There's still no news. There's still no action plan. There's still no meeting that has actually or officially been announced will take place. So, hell if I know, this could probably last a couple more weeks, like we were told by some insiders on Capitol Hill. So today's episode is going to be mainly focused on socialism. And why are we discussing that today? Why do I feel the need to talk about that? Because we live in a day and age right now in our country where the way that our democracy is set up, which is capitalism and democracy, the way that it's all set up is always under a constant fire. It is always being pushed down, especially in the areas of higher education, at college campuses, at universities, even in high schools and junior highs, and slowly starting to creep its way into younger schools like elementary schools. We are constantly told as a rising generation that capitalism is bad, that it only benefits the rich, that we, the middle class and the lower class, we are the ones that have to take all the injustice and take the shot, so to speak, on the chin, and that capitalism is something that is not beneficial for everybody. And we've seen it even more play out because what happened on Tuesday? Well, a lot of different elections happened. And if you haven't paid attention to them, that's fine. I don't blame you because not many of them happened, or the big ones that happened didn't really happen in the states that you're probably listening from, which would be, Utah or Idaho. I don't have that big of a following, so there's not that many of you across the entire country. So if you're not familiar with the names that I'm going to throw out, that's okay, because I've done my homework and I am here to help you out with who these people are, what they believe in, what happened with the elections, and how this all in a nutshell affects you, affects our country, affects the states that we live in, and ultimately affects the freedoms that we hold dear to ourselves here in America. So today we're going to talk about one of the rising political figures on the American left, or on the Democratic side, which was voted in on Tuesday as the new mayor of New York City. The great Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, the city that I personally have never been to, nor do I feel the need to ever go to unless something radical happens in the flip side. So let's dive into who he is. So Zohran Mamdani is his name. He is now the elected mayor and will take office as the mayor of New York City starting January 1st of next year. So let's learn a little bit more about him. So he's a state representative from New York who has been endorsed by and is endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America, and one of the loudest voices pushing for socialism, better get that word right, we're going to say it a lot today, socialism-based policies in the United States. But what does he actually believe in? Where do these ideas come from? And what would it mean if they were implemented nationwide? So let's break it down. Mamdani is a member of the New York State Assembly from Queens. He's a young, outspoken, and he's part of a new political movement that wants to redefine the American economy, not through gradual reforms, but through structural change. And if you've seen him, he's not really that shy about it. Now, he's not, and this isn't your kinder, gentler liberalism. This is open, organized socialism. And it's extremely easy to see if you know what you're looking for. He says it very clearly. The goal is not to help people in need. The goal is to end what he sees as capitalist systems of power. So let's go over his core beliefs. He believes, fundamentally, housing should not be private property. So he supports policies where the government or publicly owned co-ops would control large portions of the housing market. He has advocated to end what he calls landlordism entirely. And as he platforms all the time on social media, on TikTok, and other forms that he's gotten his voice out there, he wants to basically just hand out free rent, which the people of New York, as they're drowning in their landlord's rent bills that come monthly, like they do across the country for everybody, they completely go ballistic over this. They love that idea. Okay? Banks and mortgages should be controlled by the government. Mamdani, he co-sponsored a proposal called the Public Bank Act. It's built around the idea that private banks serve profit, not communities, and therefore should be replaced. He believes that energy companies should be state-owned. He supports converting utilities like Con Edison, which is the public utility out there. Or the private utility company out there. He believes that it should now be public. It should be run by the government, not shareholders. And finally, one of his main points is he believes that wealth should be redistributed, and it's not only necessary that this happens, but it's morally required that there should be a wealth redistribution in New York City. In his worldview, economic inequality is not an unfortunate byproduct of freedom. It is proof that capitalism is exploitation. So, in short, he believes private ownership equals power, and therefore private ownership must be reduced or eliminated completely. Now, you're probably bored at this point in the podcast. So if you need to, pause, take a break, come back. There's a reason why I'm explaining all of this, and there's a reason why we need to discuss this, okay? In his rhetoric, Zohran uses the language of moral struggle. He's constantly talking about the struggles of different ethnicities and different classes and different people in New York City, which of course is easy to do because New York City is a melting pot. I don't have to go there to know that. You watch any show, you hear anybody that's visited there, it's a giant melting pot. Zohran uses the language of moral struggle. He frames political opponents as protecting the rich or the colonizer, or even worse, the oppressor. It's not just policy to him, it's a battle of good versus evil. Remember that, good versus evil, because it's going to come up here in the next few minutes. And that matters because once policy shifts into moral absolutism, negotiation completely disappears. If the other side isn't wrong, but it's instead evil, then any level of political force becomes justified to stop them. And that is what he is preaching to the people of New York City. We've seen where the road leads historically, every single time. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about the problems with his vision and the problems with the ideas and his ideology that he's trying to preach to the people of New York City, and why this is a problem for you, wherever you may be listening to this, whether you're in your home, your car, in the middle of what you think is a safe state. Why is this a problem for us? So let's take a step back. Every socialist project begins with these promises: free housing, free healthcare, free education, no landlords, no private corporations, and ultimately, and especially, equality for all. Now, I'm not going to lie, that sounds great. But the mechanism to achieve that is always the same. It's the centralization of political power. First, it's public ownership. Then you move your way over to coordinated production. After that, it's we must control dissent, because people resisting are standing in the way of equality. And pretty soon, here's what happens. You have fewer freedoms, not more. Because to eliminate inequality through government control, the government must control everything. There can't be a single shred of anything that the government doesn't have its hands in completely, fully, to the 100% degree. Now, socialism always claims to create equality, but in reality, as we learn from our textbooks, if we just would pick them up, it changes who holds the power. That's all it does. It changes it from many hands to one pair of hands, from the public to the government, from private owners to public owners. That's all that happens, is power just shifts and changes from many hands to one pair of hands. So here's the American contradiction. Here's the deeper issue. America is built on the idea that individual people, not the state, they are the people. They are the primary stewards of their own future. Your home, your work, your faith, your family, your legacy, all of that is yours. Mamdani's worldview says, no, the community decides together. The state organizes, the individual is secondary. That is not a small policy disagreement. That is two opposing visions of human life. One sees freedom as the right to build something for yourself. The other sees freedom as the absence of inequality enforced by government power. Those two things, they can't coexist together, not long term. So let's take a step back and let's talk about where we've seen this happen in the history of the world. Where have we ever seen an example of this? And all we have to do is go back to the country of Venezuela. So let's talk for a minute about Venezuela and what they tried to do in terms of and why they have collapsed as a country, as a society, as a whole. Okay? Because this is a great world example, a real world example of what happens when a nation trades freedom for the promise of equality. And when people vote for leaders who say things like Mamdani, I'll take care of you, just give me the power to do it. Okay? For decades, Venezuela was one of the most wealthiest nations in the Western Hemisphere. It does not take crazy amount of research to know that that is true. And it didn't get that way because of socialism. It became wealthy because it had an abundance of oil and a mostly free market economy. People were working, the middle class was large, and prosperity was normal. Okay? But in the late 1990s, all of this started to change. And it started to feel a little bit more of an economic inequality. So what did the people do? In 1998, they voted in somebody that you all probably have heard of before, Hugo Chavez. He was a charismatic socialist who promised to fix the inequality by giving everybody more benefits. The message sounded exactly the same to what we are seeing in New York City. It sounded fair, and it was incredibly popular. So once in power, Chavez began nationalizing industries, like what Mamdani wants to do. He nationalized oil, banking, architectural, steel, telecommunications, everything. The government basically took control of production as a whole. And when the government takes over production, there's no longer any competition. There's no innovation, there's no growth, there's no accountability. It just leads to shortage. And that's what the people of Venezuela saw. He also flooded the country with government welfare programs, free housing, similar to what New York City is about to do, free healthcare clinics, and free higher education. But of course, and this is going to be the sad truth and reality that the city of New York has to learn, none of it is actually free, nor will it ever be free, because the government paid for it by printing money and controlling prices of everything. When the government forced prices to stay low, what they saw in Venezuela was businesses simply couldn't afford to keep producing, and so they began to shut down. And that led to what they saw and what was the first food and supply shortages. Then came the gun ban. In 2012, the government of Venezuela outlawed civilians to have any gun ownerships. You could not own a gun. Firearms were confiscated, they were melted down, they were destroyed. And the reason this matters in this example is because once the people no longer had the means to defend themselves, the government no longer had any reason to fear them. The people gave up their power that they had in their hands and freely gave it to the government for the guise of freedom and equality and justice and equal fairness for everybody. When Hugo Chavez died in 2013, his successor was Nicolas Maduro. And what he did was even worse. He tightened the system even further, because when you have control as a socialist, it's kind of hard to give it up. Political opposition was completely silenced. If you were against him, or if you were a leader that was against him, you were arrested. So freedom of speech basically disappeared overnight. The free press was shut down, and in 2017, Maduro effectively suspended democracy by replacing the National Assembly with a hand-picked loyalist legislator. At this point, the economy of Venezuela collapsed so bad that inflation hit the highest level in the world. They went from a thriving economy to now one that was completely crumbling under what they had voted in, thinking that it was going to be the thing that fixed and helped them the most. Food, medicine shortage became the norm, and because of this, millions of citizens fled the country to survive. Where did they come? Many of them came north towards America. When people finally decided in Venezuela, those that stayed, that they wanted to protest, and when they finally stood up to the government, now completely armed and unopposed because the citizens had no way to protect themselves or defend themselves, the government used military and police forces to fire on its own citizens. That led to the United Nations documenting the killings. And this is not just rumors. This is not just hearsay. This is not even just a plot or subplot to a movie. This is history. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens step by step. So what are the steps that happen in order for this to take place? You promise free benefits, just like what they're seeing in New York City. You expand state control. You restrict private ownership. You regulate businesses completely out of existence. You disarm the population, and you criminalize dissent. And when chaos begins, you blame who? Not the government, not socialism, or the people that were elected. You blame the rich, and you demand even more control. And that's when you see that socialism becomes capitalism. So why are we talking about all of this right now? Is because we are seeing that happen right now with Mamdani in New York City. Okay? New York City is not a place that I would recommend going to. But let's talk a little bit about why that is important today. Well, let's go back to, in my opinion, somebody that I look up to a lot, and somebody that, in my opinion, was one of the greatest presidents in America history. Let's talk a little bit about Ronald Reagan. Okay? So let's set the stage. Before Ronald Reagan was president, before he was a governor, he was speaking to Americans about something he believed was happening right in front of them. What was happening? It wasn't a violent revolution. It wasn't a dramatic overthrow. Nope. It was a slow and gradual shift of power from individuals to the government. And in his own words, he called it the creeping hand of socialism. He called it that because that's exactly what it was. At the core of his warnings, Ronald Reagan's point was simple. Freedom is rarely taken all at once. It's taken a little at a time, and it's always portrayed as being taken away for a good reason. In 1961, Reagan recorded a message for the American Medical Association about a proposed national healthcare plan. He didn't say helping people was wrong. He didn't say healthcare wasn't important. What he said was this: every expansion of government power comes disguised as compassion. Here's an exact and a direct quote from Reagan himself. Quote, one of the traditional methods of imposing socialism on a people has been by way of medicine. End quote. Now, why? Because healthcare is emotional. If the government says, if you don't let us take control, people will die, the debate ends. Nobody's ever going to contradict that. Nobody's ever going to come against it. Everybody's just going to say, yeah, that's fair. Let's do it. So Reagan said that if the government was allowed to control something as essential as health, it would set the precedent for government to control everything else in our lives. And we've seen this especially recently during the government shutdown. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The same government that claims it can feed you is the same government that can starve you. Okay? So if we allowed to control, to take over for our very basic essential needs, that is the same time that we give up everything else in our lives. Okay? Later in his life, Reagan made the speech that changed the Republican Party forever, which was the speech in 1964 entitled A Time for Choosing. And this is what he said, quote, "We are at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny," end quote. What was the enemy he was talking about? It wasn't a country. It wasn't a people. It wasn't an individual person. It was an ideology. Okay? Government that becomes so large, so powerful, and so centralized that the individuals disappear. Reagan's idea was not complicated. When the government takes responsibility, you lose responsibility. When the government gives you something, it first has to take it away from someone else. And when the government becomes the provider, it also becomes the master. The final line of his 1964 speech hits still to this day. Quote, "If we lose freedom here, there is no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth." End quote. There's nowhere else to go besides America to stand for and to stand in a free country that has democracy, that has everything you need to succeed in life. There's a reason why capitalism works. Now, I know in the climate and the day and age that we live in, that's really hard for some of us to believe in, to believe that capitalism actually benefits us and that we don't need to look for a different solution or a different party to lead us or a different way of thinking. It's extremely hard to not think that way. But capitalism has worked thus far, and it works for a very specific reason, because we still have control. We, the people. We control our future because we have freedom. As soon as we give that freedom up, we are not giving it up just casually or because we feel like it's the best thing for us to do. We're giving it up because we're promised something that the person who's promising us never has the right to actually give and never has the actual ability to give it. Okay? For example, Mamdani, he wants to raise taxes on the rich in New York City. He's promised that throughout his entire campaign, that that's what he's going to do day one. As soon as he gets into office, he's going to raise it by multiple percentage points so that the richest pay their fair share in taxes. But here's the harsh reality. He can't do that. He legally can't do that. He has to have permission from the governor of the state of New York. And she's come out and said, that's not happening. That's not happening. I don't care if that's what you've promised. That's just not happening. So, how does this apply to us today? How do we take Ronald Reagan's warnings? How do we roll it all up into one? And how do we continue to break down what's happening in New York City and how it's going to have a greater effect on us as a whole in the entire country? Okay? When we have the idea of free everything, and that's now a political platform, politicians will now openly call themselves democratic socialists. And we are a raising generation that believes that the government is supposed to solve every problem. That's what they're feeding you in the schools, in the universities, that big government is a good thing. There's a reason why the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence is set up the way that it is, that we, the people, have the power, that small government is how it always should be and how it should be today. We control the government because we are the voice of the government. The reason why we have a government is to help us when we need help with big, big political issues. But we, the people, are the reason why the government is in power, because we vote them in. Now, Reagan didn't say that socialism would come with speeches, marches, or revolutions. He didn't say it would come softly through, bureaucracy and regulation, benefits, programs, and promises. And that, once people adjusted to it, then they would forget what freedom felt like. Okay? That's what he said, that we would adjust to it, that it would come softly, that it would come through all of those things, and that we would eventually just completely forget, wake up one day saying, I don't even remember what freedom felt like. So the question now for me, for you, for anyone who's listening to this is this: are we going to, and are we willing to trade liberty for comfort? Are we giving away responsibility for convenience? And are we letting the government do what previous generations would have fought to prevent, what they died in beaches and countries and horrible conditions across the world fighting during the world wars? Are we willing to do that? Because Reagan, in my opinion, He wasn't warning us about his time. He was warning us about ours. Okay? So let's compare that and go back to what we were discussing earlier with Mamdani. Okay? So when we look at Zohran Mamdani, we're not just looking at one politician. Okay, we have to remember that. We're looking at what New York City is about to go through. This is going to be a test for them. It's a test case for whether socialism can take root in mainstream American political institutions. Okay, the question is, and this is a question that we have to ask ourselves, do we want a society where government becomes the architect of our lives, or a society where individuals, like it always should have been, families, communities, businesses, we are the ones that build that all from the ground up? That's the debate. It's not left versus right. It's always and always will be about freedom versus control. Okay? This isn't theoretical. It's not academic. This is a real political momentum that's shaping real laws, budgets, and cultural, exceptions. Okay? And expectations. I want to read to you guys. I have a friend who lives in New York City. And I want to read to you some messages that I had with them. They talk about how they live in New York, or they live outside of New York City, but they work in New York City. And this is what they said to me as we've been discussing this. They say, it's already so scary, so I can't imagine with the defunding police what it's going to become, because the police already don't do anything. And if you don't know this already, Mamdani is going to defund the police to the point where other cities across the country in other states are reaching out to, and after the election on Tuesday, we're making actual public announcements on social media through news organizations that they are hiring, and that if any New York City police officer wants to leave and come there, they're more than happy to accept them with open arms. Okay? That is what happens when you have somebody promising to defund the police in a city where the police basically already do jack shit. Okay? This is what my friend continued on to say. The police are in the train stations, but they don't do anything. They stand and play Candy Crush, which they say they wish was a joke. And they talk about how they've been chased out by people who are on drugs, who are obviously mentally not okay. They've fought homeless guys in a train station who was trying to take my friend's food. And that nobody, not the police, not any, good Samaritan or passerby, nobody helps or jumps in. They just watch, they get out of the way, and that's about it. Okay? They just talk about how at the end of the day, they think, and this is what my friend said, the people that have voted for Zohran think that free trains and buses is the answer, as if people already aren't being pushed into the tracks or oncoming trains, and if people aren't already being stabbed. And it's not going to change. None of those things will change if things in the city are just automatically free. This is a real issue, and it's a real problem. Now, take a breath, take a breather. Let's take a minute, because I want this to be super, super clear. And I know it's a heavy topic. I know the last episode we had was a heavy topic. And guess what? We're about to get even more weight thrown on this conversation, because I want to talk about something that I think is super important for us to know. We're going to talk about the religion, and we're going to talk about Muslims, and we're going to talk about the difference between, in my opinion, Muslims and Islam. Okay? Now, it's hard, because you're going to get people that say they're the same, they're different, they're separate, they're, one can't exist without the other, which is true. In my opinion, here's the difference. I've got nothing wrong with Muslims. I've got nothing wrong with the religion. I have nothing wrong with that. You're free to practice your own religion, especially here in America. What I do have a problem with Islam, because in my opinion, Islam is the extreme fundamental and it's the extreme views of Muslims. That is when, in my opinion, it becomes dangerous. Now, let's talk about why that is something that I feel is important to discuss, especially with what's going on here in America. Okay? Mamdani is clearly practicing and is a Muslim. Now, throughout his campaign and throughout his speeches and his life on social media and what was portrayed in the media and the news, he was a peaceful, soft-spoken, rah, 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 let's get this done, New York City, let's make this happen. Just go out and watch any videos before he was voted in. But after he was voted in, that all completely shifted and changed. And here is a great example of how it changed. Tuesday night, after it was called very quickly that he was going to be the next mayor of New York City, he got up and spoke. And during his victory speech, he was extremely targeted with his remarks. He went after Trump. He went after plenty of other people. He went after basically just coming out yelling and being very, very harsh and very loud spoken with what he wanted to do now that he was the next elected mayor of New York City. Even to the point that CNN's Van Jones was very surprised that this was now the rhetoric, or very surprised that, this was now the tone that Mamdani was speaking with. So here's a clip that I want to share with all of you, just to kind of illustrate the point that Van Jones and other people in CNN were a little surprised.
This speech. First of all, you got to give the guy the credit. He defeated Democratic Party royalty, the Cuomo. That's a royal family in our party. Defeated them. Defeated the oligarchs and rich folks who jumped in to try to stop him, and then defeated Donald Trump. So the triumphalism that you see there is earned. A year ago, nobody ever heard of the guy. And the younger people who I'm hearing from feel a great deal of relief and pride, and they're fired up, and they feel they've been silenced for too long. So that speech appealed to some. But I think he missed an opportunity. I think the Mamdani that we saw on the campaign trail, who was a lot more calm, who was a lot warmer, who was a lot more embracing, was not present in that speech. And I think that Mamdani is the one you need to hear from tonight. There are a lot of people trying to figure out, can I get on this train with him or not? Is he going to include me? Is he going to be more of a class warrior even in office? I think he missed a chance tonight to open up and bring more people into the tent. I think his tone was sharp. I think he was using the microphone in a way that he was almost yelling. And that's not the Mamdani that we've seen on TikTok and the great interviews and stuff like that. So I felt like there was a little bit of a character switch here, where the warm, open, embracing guy that's close to working people was not on stage tonight, and there was some other voice on stage. That said, he's very young, and he just pulled off something that's very, very difficult. And
okay, so why do I share that video with you? Well, it paints what I'm going to talk about perfectly clear. Now, I'm not perfect with my knowledge on Islam and the religious beliefs that Muslims practice and believe in, but there is one thing that I have researched and that I do know. There is a Islamic legal principle that Muslims, or that permits Muslims to conceal their faith or to lie or be deceptive during times where they feel that their life is threatened, during times of war, during times that they feel they might be persecuted, tortured, or even be put to death. And this principle is called taqiyya. Now, why do I bring this up? Okay? Because I believe that during his campaign, Mamdani did a very, very good job at living that principle of lying to people, of hiding a little bit behind his real views, his real agenda, and concealing himself to the point where he came off as somebody who, as a socialist would, promises really, really good things, promises life-changing events and life-changing policies for the people of New York City. But as soon as they are voted into office, as soon as he gets what he wants, he completely changes. He does a 180, he flips, he turns on his head. And then you have Van Jones from CNN saying things like, that's not the Mamdani that we saw during the campaign trail. He was a little bit more outspoken. He sounded a little angry, and that probably isn't the way that he probably should have gone about, speaking and talking to people on the night of his victory. I believe that is for a reason. I believe that we are seeing right now in America, we are seeing a takeover happen. We are seeing the religion of Islam come to our country and not just be here and coexist and assimilate with the American people and the Christianity beliefs and foundation principles that we have here. We're not seeing that happen. We're seeing the religion of Islam come here with people from different countries who probably are really good people. Majority of them are probably really good people, but they are coming here. They are being radicalized by local leaders who are calling for them to take action, to step up, to make something of their communities. And here's the thing that we've learned from history, and I'm going to talk about a real world example from our brothers and sisters across the pond. The people of Islam, they do not assimilate. They do not coexist. They do not integrate well. They do not even try to make it known that they're doing their best to, join hands with people in the country that they're coming to. They come, they take over, and they don't do it in a way that, in my opinion, is right, or in a way that is helpful, or in a way that is even peaceful. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the examples that I would like to. Let's talk about England, okay? Our friends, our brothers and sisters across the pond, okay? Over the last decade and a half, the United Kingdom, okay, they have undergone a massive cultural shift. What has happened is not just from an immigration and from immigration itself, it's from the policies and assumptions behind how the immigration was completely handled. And in one major chapter or, page of this story, it involves the rise of large consecrated Muslim refugee and migrant communities, mostly from the Middle East, South Asia, and North Africa. So let me be clear and let me be upfront. This is not about all Muslims. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. This is about policy. It's about assimilation, and it's about what happens when a government prioritizes sensitivity over social cohesion and national identity. Okay, we're talking about England, but we're going to relate this back to what is happening right now in America. So here's my first main point, okay? In cities like Birmingham, England, Bradford, Luton, you don't just see cultural diversity, you see complete opposite parallel societies that are living together or closely together, but completely opposite ways of life. Neighborhoods where English isn't spoken. You see schools where the national culture isn't even being presented, and where the expectation is not integration into Britain, but Britain bending to accommodate separate norms. That it's not accidental. It was the result of government policy in England that treated multiculturalism as separate bubbles rather than a shared identity. Okay? And why I feel that that's important to note is for this exact reason. And let me share a little bit with you. Share my inbox as I always do. Here we go.
In schools, they're pressuring us to learn about Islam and learn about the people that are coming over. I don't want to learn about that. I want to learn about my culture, my beliefs, and I'm proud to be English. Yeah.
Have they taught you about the Bill of Rights?
No.
Did you learn about the Battle of Agincourt?
No. In school, they were teaching us about, about Islam, about Prophet Muhammad, and all their ideologies. They barely covered Christianity at all.
Did they tell you about how he was a warlord who brutally murdered people?
No, they wouldn't say any of that. And when I tried to stand up and say that some of them things, I would get in trouble for it. Suspended from school because apparently I was being racist. I wasn't. I was just trying to,
You're questioning an ideology.
Yes, I was questioning the ideology, and in my opinion, it's not the right ideology. They're trying to take away my free speech in school. They're trying to silence me in school, suspend me from school for, trying to stand up and discuss stuff about Islam, the wrongs of it. So they only say, Islam's a peaceful religion. But if you look into their book, you'll find out it's not. In school.
Okay, so there's one example. Here's another example. Okay. Let me move this out of the way. Here we go.
But first, GB News can exclusively reveal that a Welsh primary school has been slammed after worried parents were branded racist for raising concerns about an Islam lesson. Let me explain. Seaview Primary School in Swansea recently brought in a representative from a local mosque to teach the school children about Islam. But parents complained that Christian denominations don't get the same representation in their religious education lessons. Apparently, parents were not informed about the visits beforehand, and then when some objected to the lessons, they were apparently made to feel as though they were racist. Children were being marked down on things like misspelling mosque or Quran. But there is a bit more to this. There is even the claim that one of the children said, I'm Christian, I don't pray to Allah, and that the person who came in to that school to give that talk and to be with the children said that by the time you hit year 6, you will all be Muslim. But first, GB...
So that's what's going on. That's what's going on in England. Okay? So, the other thing that we're seeing, call it my second point with England, is we're seeing Sharia councils. So over the past decade, there have been, as of right now, more than 80 unofficial Sharia councils that have been documented that are operating inside the UK. Now, once again, the issue isn't religion. The issue is a second legal system forming alongside the British one. They already have a legal system. They already have it dialed, but now we have a second one. There have been investigations that have found that women have been pressured into staying in abusive marriages, that have had custody decisions that have been made that completely contradict and go against the British law, and community enforcement based on religious pressure instead of individual rights. That is what they're seeing. And this is what happens when a country becomes too afraid to enforce its own values. We're seeing the grooming of gang and scandals there. There's, over the last decade, there's been child exploitation of grooming gangs. There's been an overwhelmingly amount of men from Pakistani Muslim backgrounds that have been grooming these young men to be in gangs, and authorities refuse to intervene because police and local councils have admitted that they feared being called racist. So eventually the safety of children was completely just sacrificed to protect the feelings of political institutions. That's being a coward. That's not tolerance. Make no mistake. Since 2010, the UK has endured multiple Islamist-inspired terrorist attacks. There has been the Manchester Arena, the London Bridge, the Parsons Green, and even today, MI5 monitors thousands of individuals on radicalization watch lists, not because all Muslims are terrorists. Let that be known. Not all of them are extremists. That is the truth. But because failed integration creates ideological vacuums. where now radical networks can thrive. It's not a religious issue, it's a governance issue. And if you think that it's only happening in England, you are dead ass wrong. It's happening here. You have Mamdani's mother saying things like this. He was born in Uganda, raised between India and America. He thinks of himself as a Ugandan and as Indian. He is not an American at all. That is who New York City has just voted to be their next mayor. And an overwhelmingly majority of the population, of course, in order to be even voted in as mayor and win, majority of the population believe that when Mamdani says things like free healthcare, free rent, free school, all of these things will now be controlled by the government. People believe him that that is beneficial and that is good. And that is not the case at all. What we know and what we have seen is that these things are one and the same. The ideology of liberalism, socialism, and communism are all intertwined together. Liberalism, it sees that social democracy needs to then take place. It then sees that democratic socialism needs to then be in place. Eventually that turns to state socialism and eventually communism. And how does that shift happen? It comes from people getting told that the economic inequality feels unfair, and they start believing that the only way and the only thing that can fix it is the government. This typically occurs when, and I want you to think about this for a minute. I want you to think about what we've been told by the media for the last, 5-10 years. This happens and occurs when the middle class collapses, when wealth concentrates heavily at the top, when people feel politically powerless, and when economic crises hit, like inflation, recession, war, other things like that. What does that sound like? To me, it sounds like the most recent years that we've seen, when we have economic crisis happen, when we had the, in my mind, plandemic, right? Or the scandemic, when you have things happen like, the January 6th attack at the Capitol, when you have our media, our controlled media, control the narrative that people feel politically powerless. I hear it all the time from friends, from family that say things like, well, I'm not going to vote because my voice is just one person and it's not really going to make a difference because our elections are already rigged enough. And if I vote left, it's only going to go right. Or if I vote right, it's only going to go left because they've already established who's going to be the winner. We also get told constantly on a day-to-day basis that the people at the top of the food chain in our society, the wealthiest, the top 1%, those people are wrong. Those people need to pay more in taxes. Those people are the reason why I am poor. Those people are the reason why I am oppressed. And when we have things like happening right now, which is the middle class is collapsing. We can't afford to live. We can't afford rent, our mortgages. We can't afford food. We can't afford healthcare. We can't afford basic human things and human costs that we need to even survive. We can't afford that anymore. That's what's happening. So when all of that happens, which has been planned to happen, make no mistake, this is all planned. When all of that happens, that's when socialism starts to become a little bit more attractive, because people start to believe that all of this economic inequality is unfair and that the only way to fix it is if the government can have control. And that is where we eventually see things, for example, happen this way. We have socialism that then turns into, like I said before, let me back up, I'm all over the place. Liberalism that turns into social democracy. Social democracy turns into democratic socialism. Social or democratic socialism turns into state socialism. And eventually that has all laid the foundation for communism. So keep in mind that this is not something that is happening in other countries and that we need to just be completely blissfully unaware of it. It is happening here in our country. And I believe it is exactly what we are about to see happen in New York City. The city that never sleeps, the Big Apple, the city that people don't fully understand how serious this is going to be and how bad this is going to be, how hard of a lesson this is going to be for the people of New York City to learn. We're already seeing millions of people leave, shut down businesses, close down their homes, their shops, completely just escape and get out of New York City because they don't want to live there. For example, Robert Tucker. Who's Robert Tucker? He's the fire department of New York. He is the fire commissioner. And after the election on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, he immediately turned in his resignation. And he is, as of December 19th of this year, he is no longer going to be the fire commissioner in New York City. Why? Because he does not want to be in my opinion, doesn't want to hold that position in office when they have Mamdani enter into the office of the mayor. We are seeing this happen in plenty of other places. It's not just happening in New York City. We're seeing this happen in Michigan. And if you don't know what's happening in Michigan, take a look at Dearborn. Take a look at what's happening in Michigan right now. If you don't think that it's just happening in New York City and Michigan, take a look at what's happening in Minnesota. Okay? Give you a little bit of an insight. In Minnesota, just recently, they had the mayor race, and the mayor of Minnesota, or the person who was running for the position of mayor, was a guy by the name of Omar Fatah, probably pronouncing that wrong. My apologies. This is one of his rallies before voting happened on Tuesday. This is one of his rallies that he had. Now, this is important to note. He's from Somalia. And at his rally, there's a huge population of Somalian people in Minnesota. If you didn't know that, now you do. This was one of his rallies that he had.
Democratic Socialist and Somali State Senator Omar Fatah addressed supporters in Minneapolis's Cedar Riverside neighborhood, speaking in Somali and waving a Somali flag. Watch.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Somalia. Somalia. Hiran State. Mawisle. Mawisle. Early voting was hadda illa November 4.
Fatah is being...
Now, he lost, thankfully. But it was too close for my liking, for anyone's liking. That is somebody who is outspokenly for, and he has even said, his allegiance is to Somalia. It's not to America. His allegiance is to Somalia. If your allegiance is to another country, even to the point where you're waving that country's flag, get out of America. Go back to that country. If you feel that that country is so great, go back to that country. Don't stay here and try to make this country, America, that country that you came from. There's a reason why you're here, and it's for the reason of, in my opinion, two things. Either you truly believe that the country you came from isn't that great, and that's why you want to be in a better country, which is America, or you're trying to bring some ludicrous, dumb ideology to America to try to take over. In my opinion, it's one of those two things. So just either cut through the horse shit and tell us which one it is, which I think a lot of these officials have told us. We just have been kind of blind to it. Hopefully not anymore. Or go back to your country. If you feel that that country's so great that you need to wave the flag, go back. I'm sure they will welcome you with open arms. But here's my point with all of this. Socialism is not the answer. To the people of New York City, you have to learn this lesson the hard way. You either got to get out or you got to learn the lesson the hard way. To people who are listening to this who believe that capitalism is wrong, I urge you and encourage you not to believe that, but to look into why it is, in my opinion, the whole reason why America gets to be the way that it is. Now, at times it may feel unfair. At times it may be something that you need to question, which, look, healthy critique of capitalism is a good thing. As long as you're doing it to strengthen our communities and to strengthen our families, I've got no issues with it. Critique it. Make it better. But don't try to change it with an ideology that has never worked any times that it's tried. Socialism does not work. Communism does not work. In the words of Ronald Reagan, the most fearful words and the scariest words that you can ever hear is somebody say, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I encourage all of you to be more educated. I encourage all of you to, and maybe this is a shameful plug, like, comment, subscribe, and share this with anyone that you feel needs to hear this. Not just to support me and support the channel, which of course I always will appreciate, but because this is something that is happening in our day and age and happening in our own backyard. If you think New York or Minnesota or Michigan is too far away from you, it's not. If you think that things like this or ideas like this isn't happening in places like downtown Salt Lake City or Provo or Ogden or wherever you may live, it's not. It is happening. I encourage you to become educated, to look into this. Hell, just chat GPT it. We live in a day and age where at the fingertips, what you're listening to this podcast on is a supercomputer that you can easily just search. Has socialism ever worked? What's the difference between capitalism and communism? What are the pros? What are the cons? Hell, ask Siri to make you a Venn diagram. I just encourage you and plead with you to become educated, because there will come a time where this will come in your direct front yard. We have to ask ourselves, and this is what I've been saying for a while, if we're going to invite these people into our home, if we're going to invite them into our country, if we're going to say, it's Thanksgiving, come into my house, come, please, enjoy a meal with us. What are they bringing to the table? If they're bringing to the table socialism casserole and communism cornbread, I don't want it. If you're bringing a way of life for your family to improve and you're willing to assimilate with the American way of life, to learn our language, to learn our traditions, to learn why America was founded by immigrants, but done in the best way possible. Immigrants who came here and wanted to make it better, not wanted to bring some BS crap from a failed country, then stay. As long as you're doing it the right and legal way, stay. We have to ask ourselves these questions, because if we don't, one day we will wake up and we will be the next Venezuela. We will say, you know what? I thought we were voting for something that was good, and I thought that I was giving up my freedom and way of life to the government who would make it better. And in fact, and in reality, the complete opposite has happened. I am now controlled. I no longer have freedoms. My way of life no longer exists because the government controls it. That is what we are up against, and that is the fight that we have to make, and the fight we have to fight. Because the future is something that we build together as long as we are free to build it. Now, I hope today's episode, you got something out of it. I know both Wednesday's episode and today's episode were a little bit heavier than what I'd like to talk about. It's kind of the political world and landscape that we live in. I hope that it was something where you got something out of it and it was educational to the point where you learned something new. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave a review. If you're listening to us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like and comment and share it with people. If you're listening to us or found us on Instagram, please follow us there. Our Instagram is at WeTheFuture_USA, or you can find us by searching We the Future Podcast. Any support helps. Any likes or shares or comments help, because at the end of the day, this is something that we all need to do together. This is something where I believe we all have a fundamental right and a God-given responsibility to be able to restore this country to what it should be and what it should have always been, but to make it a better place for our kids and their kids and their kids and so on and so forth. We are the future and we build that future, and we have to do it together, and we do it one step at a time. And today it's by fighting socialism, even though we should never even be in this place in the first place. But that's today's episode. I really do hope you enjoyed listening to it. Please let me know. Send me a message. If you got my text or my phone number, shoot me a text. I'd love to hear thoughts, comments. Like, subscribe, and share it, as I've always said. And we will see you all on next week's episode. We will return back to the home studio, which is always a great thing. Comfortable chair, better sound quality, better lighting. And we will go back to our regularly scheduled programming, which will be Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But in short, thanks for tuning in today and listening. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to We the Future. I'm Bryce Wheeler. Take care.